You're about to meet the innovators and influencers who are restoring the Judeo-Christian foundations of our culture right here on The Patrick Coffin Show.
And now, here's your host, Patrick Coffin.
Yes, indeed. Welcome to the show. I am Patrick Coffin. Matt Fradd is my guest. He is a speaker, a blogger, a podcaster, an author, a father, and a husband, and a treasured colleague of mine from our days at Catholic Answers. And I'm so happy he's going to be hanging out with us today to talk about his latest book. It's called The Porn Myth, Exposing the Reality Behind the Fantasy of Pornography. Matt was also named the sexiest chastity speaker alive by Eye of the Tiber News. Matt Fradd, so glad to have you, brother.
Yeah, it meant a lot. It meant a lot. My parents were like, totally, Matthew, it's about time you were recognized.
Was that your dad who said that, or was it your mother?
That was my mum. They both sound the same, though.
Hate's a strong word. I dislike when hosts pretend not to know their guests. You and I are good friends, and I'm doing this feature series on pornography, starting with the one I think is the best on it, and that is you. And not just because my own tribe knows you by name recognition, but this book that you've written, Matthew, I'm cranking through it, and this is not me blowing steam or applying a sufficient layer of butter. I can't see why another book about pornography needs to be written, because you have come at this thing from so many angles. And first of all, right out of the gate, this is not a book that relies on faith or religious arguments or the Bible or Jesus or the Pope. You've come at it from a purely fact-based, experiential, scientific model with a lot of heart, because your own story is in it, and the experience of people who get mired into the pornography addiction is all there, and it's non-faith-based. I think that's an important point to bring up right at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. There's about 30 chapters, and I tried to think about as many arguments for pornography as I could, and then I wanted to respond to them with the latest scientific research, anecdotes from people who have been in the industry or the spouses of those who are addicted to porn or what have you. So yeah, I'm really proud of it, actually, to be honest with you. There's about 35 pages of bibliography in the back. It's well researched, and I think it's going to really help. It just needs to sell, that's all.
Well, I think it just needs to be let out of its cage, and we'll do our best to send people that way, and not only hearts and minds, but wallets. All proceeds from this book, the royalties are going to Children of the Immaculate Heart. I know Grace Williams, the foundress. It's a magnificent apostolate here in Southern California, in the San Diego area, which is doing just yeoman's work in protecting and safeguarding victims of sex trafficking. So kudos to that. I think this is a great win-win scenario, and so God bless that decision.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's something my wife and I prayed about. We felt like Jesus was telling us to do. I joke that if the book does really well, maybe I'll regret giving my royalties to these people. But no, I don't mean that. I'm like, yes, Jesus, it's your work.
Well,
so
surely you signed a royalty prenup, right? Was there a royalty prenup?
Right. Yeah, there probably will be in the coming days, yeah.
Well, Matt, I thought we'd start with a 10,000 feet above the tarmac look at the problem. And I'm going back to my own childhood, and this is pre-internet. Yes, kids, pre-internet, where if you really wanted to look at pornography, you had to go to a certain area of town, you had to go to a store, and you had to face a clerk. It was an object that there was some human interaction. And now, with the rise of the internet culture and everything free and everything one click away, pornography, as you point out, is sort of like that moth that was brought over with well-intentioned European scientists brought this moth to Boston. I think it's a fantastic analogy. Just kind of unpack that one a little bit, because I think it's very apropos.
Yeah, well, they brought it over to try and kill a certain pest, and they ended up mating like crazy, these moths, and ended up ravishing the forests. And so now they were trying to figure out, how do we kill these things? Well, they realized that these female moths let off a certain scent, and it was that scent that the male would pick up and then go and mate with it. So what they did is they created these little pellets that had the scent of the female moths within it, flew over these forests and dropped the pellets down, and the males had no idea what way to go. They became confused, and they didn't end up mating. They were so kind of overwhelmed by the potency of this new scent, if you will. And so I want to say, Yeah, I want to say that pornography is sort of like that. You think of, a young guy who might look at porn on a Friday afternoon. In 3 hours, he's probably seen more pornography than someone prior to the time of the internet, or at least, magazines, could have seen in 20 lifetimes, and that does something to a man.
So that was like free moth porn from the sky.
Yeah, free moth porn for the sky. There's a sentence you never thought you would say on your show.
You said these moths ravished the forest. I'm sure they also ravaged it. That was a delicious Freudian slip, by the way.
Thank you very much. Bugger! Yeah.
Matt, since the book's called The Porn Myth, you've structured the book according to the standard bromides and cliches that are false. And I thought we'd start with one you see a lot, especially in the mainstream media, and not just from porn producers who have an obvious vested interest in domesticating and validating everything they're doing, but you hear this, I call them sort of the on the periphery supporters. They don't want to be judgmental, so they say, well, it's just adult entertainment. We would never recommend it for children. Why is just adult entertainment as an argument a myth?
Well, I mean, there are some things where, and that's sort of a legitimate thing to say, right? Like drinking a cocktail or going to a certain play or a picture.
Mel Gibson movie.
Or maybe, yeah, exactly. The latest Hacksaw Ridge, where that is adult entertainment. But what I find interesting is, 100 years ago in Great Britain, if you said you were going to a gentleman's club, it was understood that you were going to an upper-class establishment to play parlor games, gossip with people of your social class, etc. Whereas today, in the US, if someone says to you, I'm going to a gentleman's club, if they said that to me, I'd feel sorry for them. And I know exactly what they mean. They're going to pay for a striptease, right, in a low-lit bar that smells like urinal cakes and hopelessness, right? This isn't befitting. Of gentleman or adult. And I think most of us recognize that. You said you lived before the time of the internet. I did too. I had friends whose dads hid porn in their closets or what have you, And I remember at the time thinking, wow, your dad is so cool. But then you get older and you're like, wow, your dad was kind of creepy, And that's something I think most people kind of chuckle at because they know that it's true. Like, we would much rather have fathers who are like, no, my eyes are only for your mother. I'm not interested in that other stuff. We recognize that's a much more masculine position than someone who trolls the internet, clicking from teaser to teaser, right? Having an intimate encounter with his iPhone or laptop.
I shared with you, Matt, a few days ago, something that I won't mention any names or locations, but it's a very sad story of a distraught set of parents whose 6-year-old boy had discovered hardcore pornography on, I think it was a device, an innocent search for butt or something, and he got the mother lode of hardcore porn, and it began to affect everything about him, including he began to pose naked. A 6-year-old boy. So how important is it for parents to realize that the porn industry is coming after their children? It's not just that you have to worry about someone stumbling upon it. It's an active pursuit from the other side. I mean, I'm a proud affiliate of Covenant Eyes. If you go to covenanteyes.com, my name, Patrick, will get you 30 free days. But talk about the importance of parents wising up and protecting their children. And for many parents, it's just too late. The horses are out of the barn.
Yeah, look, I mean, I speak to about 50 to 70,000 teens, young adults every year, and every time I speak without fail, I get messages on Instagram and Twitter from these young people who are so up to their eyeballs in porn. Some of them are 12 years old, and I think the thing to recognize is that so much to say. I would say to parents, look, your children are going to see pornography and you need to talk to them about it before you think that you do. And so I think, generally speaking, probably the age of 6, or at least when they start using any sort of device. Now, that usually freaks parents out, but recognize just by saying the word pornography, you're not imposing upon their little 6-year-old brains all of the images that bubble up in your own.
Yeah.
Rather, you might say something like, if you see a picture or a video of someone who's showing parts of their body that their bathing suit should cover, you should always tell mommy or dad. you know?
Yeah.
Or let's say we've missed it and we think, gosh, I should have said that, but my kids are like 15. I don't know if they've seen porn. They have. So here's what you might say to them. You might say, I just want to let you know, if you've ever looked at porn, or if you feel like you're addicted to it now, you can always come to me and I will help you. I think the number one thing parents should do is apologize to their children. Not get angry at their children. That's exactly the wrong thing to do. It's an understandable reaction. But the right thing to do is to say, I'm so sorry that this happened to you and that I didn't protect you the way that I should. And I want to let you know things are going to be different from now on. And as you say, Covenant Eyes is right now the best accountability and filtering software out there. So it's really not an option, you know. I mean, I feel like if we as parents have heard about Covenant Eyes and we fail to or whatever, I don't care about Covenant Eyes, some other app, I'm not trying to sell a particular product, I just think that's the best, and we don't lock down these things, I kind of feel like we're going to be accountable to Almighty God. Is that laying it on too thick?
No, I don't think it is.
Yeah.
You also have, excuse me, a podcast, Pints with Aquinas, and I like thought experiments. And what would the angelic doctor think if he were to be teleported today, and had access to Google for 5 minutes, and something were to be shown to him? I mean, this is a completely culture-shaping, revolutionary. It's worse than tectonic plates being shifted. This is a total inversion of values. It's something straight out of Nietzsche, I think, where good is evil and evil is good. What about the myth, Matt, that says if you're against pornography, you're anti-sex, you're a prude, you should go back to the Victorian era?
Yeah. Well, first we should point out, of course, that pornography isn't sex. You know, like masturbating to images of women pretending to like you isn't actually sex. In fact, I think quitting masturbating to images of women pretending to like you is actually one of the most sex-positive things you can do. And over the last several years, there have been a number of studies that have come out that are talking about the increased rate in what people are calling pornography-induced erectile dysfunction in young men due to pornography. And this isn't religious prudes. This is people like Dr. Abraham Morgenthaler, who's the clinical urologist at Harvard Medical School. This is people like Norman Doidge, who wrote the book The Brain That Changes Itself by Penguin Books. Actually, he says it isn't really in erectile dysfunction, it's more impotency. Because with erectile dysfunction, the problem has to do with blood flow to the penis. But with impotency, you know, porn-induced impotency, the problem's between the ears. And so I've met young men who aren't Christian, who are trying to have sex but can't, okay, who've said to me there have been times they've tried Viagra, and they know others who have tried Viagra or Cialis, and it actually hasn't helped because their brain has become so fried by what they're looking at. So yeah, it's just pornography. And it's like someone like getting addicted to playing NFL on the Xbox and saying, I'm really addicted to sports. Like, no, you're not. You know, maybe you should be playing sports. Right. And so the problem with porn isn't sex. It's like, well, if they're like, well, it's just natural. Yeah, it is natural. So why don't you do it the way God intended it? Why be so afraid of that? Does
irony get more rich than that? That the sea of promises of sexual delight and intimacy would end up with ED.
Right. Yeah. And it's not. And just
fail.
Quickly. It's not just men, it's women as well. So I've encountered a number of women, but one in particular who said to me that she would have to leave her husband in the bed, go and sort of rev herself up with internet porn and come back so that they could be together, right? I mean, that's just, if for no other reason, it's unbeautiful. This isn't the sort of love life we dreamed of when we were younger. And it's not the sort of love life we should aspire to. And it doesn't have to be that way, so that's good.
What about the argument that says, look, I'm just clicking for free. I'm not financially contributing to this monster industry. It's an occasional thing for me, and it's free. So what's the harm? I'm not paying any porn stars or any producer's salary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've never paid, and I've never paid for Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or Snapchat, and yet don't think these aren't large corporations that rake in a lot of cash. You know, the fact is, if we stopped clicking on Facebook and would die, you know, and if every time we click on a porn site, we are fueling the demand for this sort of stuff. People pay big bucks to have not just image advertisements on these websites, but even text links. So it's just not true that we are contributing to the demand whenever we go to a porn site.
A note to our single listeners and viewers, Matthew, who believe that, wow, when I get married, I'll be fine because I can have an outlet. I won't have to use porn anymore.
So there's a number of problems with this. One, we're sort of treating our future spouse like a receptacle, that, well, now I need to masturbate to strangers pretending to have sex, but one day I'll be married and I can fulfill that urge in her or with him. That's not a really cool place to begin your marriage, first of all.
Yeah.
But secondly, some women fall into the trap of thinking if I just had more sex with him, he wouldn't look at porn, or if I just looked like this, if I was bustier, or if I was more adventurous, he wouldn't need to go to porn. But here's why that is false. If I met a gambling addict and I said, you know what, this guy's a gambling addict, I'm going to help him out. I'm going to give him $20,000. That doesn't cure his gambling addiction, even if all he ever dreamed of was winning that much money.
Yeah.
Because the gambling addict really isn't after the cash. He's after something else, the anxiety of the whole ordeal, the thrill of the chase. And something's true in respect to pornography too. It's not just an orgasm that he wants. It's the novelty. It's the endless clicking and variety. It's the even the ritual in which he might begin by looking at this sort of thing and then move on to this sort of thing. So it's a number of things that are involved. But yeah. So it's not. Yeah. I'll leave it at that.
I've talked to people who don't even believe that pornography or sex addiction exists. It's just bad morals or weak wills. To which you say what?
Well, we need to define what we mean by addiction. If we want to say that pornography isn't or can't be addictive, we need to have an understanding of what we mean by addiction. Now, usually people mean something like this. They usually argue as follows: only drugs are addictive. Porn isn't a drug, therefore it's not addictive. But this is really out of touch with what we now know through modern neuroscience. Yeah, porn isn't a drug. You don't inhale porn or inject it. But pornography does elicit powerful neurotransmitters in the brain, which the brain can become addicted to. And one of those that you keep hearing again and again is that of dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter, and by the way, it's also got a brain drug. It is a drug. And it incentivizes us to perform actions that are conducive to our survival. Now, what we've discovered is when we view pornography compulsively, you think about this, and the pornography today is very different than it was 20 years ago. Playboy magazine compared to today, it's very different. Someone might have multiple links open. They might have multiple screens open. They're clicking from 1 second, 20-second teaser to the next. It's as if the brain is being shouted at by dopamine. Now, let me use an analogy. Suppose you're on the phone with your boss and he's upset with you because you've done a stupid thing and he shouts at you and he keeps shouting. Well, if you don't hang up on him, you might remove the receiver a little bit, okay? Now, if your boss stops shouting and starts speaking normally, you won't be able to hear him unless you bring the receiver back up to your ear.
Right.
Similarly, pornography shouts at us, as it were, with dopamine. Now, when we shut that laptop, turn off the computer, and go back into our lives and try to experience pleasure in things that used to give it to us, like hanging out with friends, jumping on the trampoline with my daughter, going to a family picnic, playing an instrument. All of a sudden, we cannot hear the pleasure these things used to give us. And that's really scary. And this is why for many people, their lives seem to become more and more dull, more and more sort of two-dimensional. They find things less and less interesting. And I often have parents say to me, my kid just doesn't seem interested in anything. He's only interested in being in his room. And you're like, this is sort of why.
So reality itself becomes kind of drab, black and white sepia, and it can't compete with the vibrant technicolor of pornography.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Another analogy would be like you and I both did the Whole30 recently, right? Which is 30 days, essentially a paleo diet. Now, we have heard of people who are so accustomed to eating candy that they don't find strawberries sweet. They need to sweeten them with Splenda,
Yeah.
And that sounds absurd. And you and I did this, and we both said to each other on a phone call that after about a week or so, we realized, wow, the taste of this particular cucumber or what have you. Well, something similar is going on with pornography. Like we can't taste, if you will, the sweetness of these particular experiences because we've been bombarded by this superficial, mass-produced, industrialized form of sexuality.
We said at the outset that the book, The Porn Myth, which we're discussing with our guest, Matt Fradd, is not religious-based. It doesn't present arguments based on Scripture or divine revelation. But I do want to ask you one question that I think will resonate with people listening and watching now who are believers, and that is the additional layer of shame, because not only is it bad for me and bad for my marriage and so on, but there's also the moral layer of I will reject myself because I can't stop this harmful pleasure. What do you say to people who are Christians who keep falling and it begins to affect their faith? Can God really help me? Because I've been white knuckling it, or I've been to confession if they're Catholic, and I don't seem to make progress. What words of hope can you give to someone who feels like even prayer prayer's like, the ultimate strawberry that should taste amazing is bland and seems to have no power?
I like to put it this way, and usually when I do, someone's offended. So buckle up. You won't be, but I think some of your viewers might be. We all agree that grace builds upon nature. You say that, and even if Catholics don't understand it, they nod because they've heard it somewhere. Well, we don't understand, many of us, the nature of pornography addiction. And so consequently, what we do often is we throw grace-sounding words at people. Right? Pray the rosary, you say things like that. Yeah. And then the penitent or the person being counseled nods sagely and remains unhelped. All right?
Yeah, name it and claim it.
It's not that prayer can't be effective. It's just that we need to understand the nature of addiction. And often we don't. And we say, well, you got to pray more. Well, there's people who are praying 3 rosaries a day who are looking at pornography. There are people who go to adoration every day who go to pornography. And so we need to do more than that. I think often the way in which we pray is an impediment to overcoming pornography because we treat prayer as if it were a transactional exchange. I give you a rosary, you give me a day without porn, as if it's the Blessed Mother's fault if I forget to pray the rosary and then look at porn.
Right.
So I'd say there are a number of things that have to happen. Like the 2 definite things one must be doing is you have to have an accountability partner and you have to have accountability in filtering software. If you don't have those 2 things, seriously question whether or not you're even interested in recovery, because maybe you're not. And you know what? You don't have to be. You don't have to quit looking at porn if you don't want. You can keep going down this dead-end road. No one's forcing you to change. But if you do want to change, you got to do those things. And not to discount going to a group, right? Either a Sexaholics Anonymous group or pornography addiction, sex addiction are distinct, but we can benefit from them. And then even going to counseling. Like these things are actually really helpful and they work.
Matt, is it almost always true that pornography is progressive in that it demands the next kick? So you can go from let's say, something that's considered rather mild, Cosmo magazine cover, which of course is, I know it's pornography. The publisher says it is, or Playboy magazine or something, and then on down to the most illegal, disgusting, horrifying things. I don't, not even interested in bringing up.
Yeah.
Is it always progressive in that way, or can you, dip your foot in the pool and then go back to playing chess?
It's progressive in one of 2 ways, and this goes back to what we mentioned a moment ago with dopamine. After a while, the shouting of pornography even begins to deafen or lessen, and you need more shocking forms of pornography to keep it yelling at the same degree so you feel normal, right? So there's 2 ways in which it can escalate. One, you can keep looking at the same stuff but for longer. And so there's stories I've heard of men who'll get into bed with their wives, their wife falls asleep and they go downstairs and look at porn until about 5 a.m, right? Like 6, 7, 8 hours. And then they walk back upstairs, lay in bed, the alarm goes off, and they go to work completely exhausted. And this is a regular routine. And so for some of these people, they might be viewing the similar sort of thing. And the way it escalates is in the duration, the amount of time in which they're looking at it. The second way is that it progresses or degresses in the sorts of content you're looking at. Because most people don't wake up and think, I want to watch a rape scene. Like I want to watch rape porn or body punishing porn or even child porn. I don't think many people wake up and think this is what I want to do without there having been a history of it prior. What happens is we just kind of start tunneling into these different rabbit holes, if you will. And so those would be the one of the 2 ways it usually progresses.
Mary Eberstadt is a magnificent commentator on this. She has a book called Adam and Eve Before the Pill, and she believes that one day in the future, please God, society will view the pornography industry the way we currently view the tobacco industry. Because back in the 60s, I think it was 1963 when the Surgeon General finally put on the packages, there's a cancer risk and increased health risks associated with tobacco use. Do you think that will gain traction? Do you think that's a way of going at it? The physical, medical impact rather than coming at it from a finger pointing point of view? Because I think it's a fascinating thesis. I hope she's right.
I think we're already beginning to see that.
You do?
Yeah. I do. I feel like we have clearly reached a tipping point in our culture. When Pamela Anderson comes out and calls those who look at porn losers, we've reached a tipping point. When James Hetfield, the lead singer of Metallica, narrates a documentary about the harms of pornography, which is about to come out, we've reached a tipping point in our culture. We exist in a time right now where either we individually or those we love have been negatively affected by pornography. And the porn apologists who want to keep telling us it's good for us in society, their claims, I think, are appearing increasingly ridiculous, just like the claims of, the tobacco apologists. Now, if you go on YouTube, you can see these people say, there's no correlation between smoking and cancer. It's not addictive. You show a teenager this and they sort of laugh like, oh, how could anyone think that? And so, I'm of the opinion that we should lead with science. And part of that is because millennials tend to say that it's science that they want more than anything else. And I think that's understandable. When you live in a culture where you've got a million different blogs and podcasts all saying conflicting things, you just want to say, well, what's the bottom line? What's the stats? What's the facts? Yeah. So I think leading with the science is a good thing to do. But of course, we don't just want to stay there because obviously tobacco smoking isn't intrinsically evil. I mean, maybe not obviously, but I don't think it is. Whereas pornography, absolutely, I do think is intrinsically evil. So we're not trying to equate tobacco smoking with pornography. We're just saying that leading with the research is a good way to open the door.
I know that someone's going to ask me about it, or maybe you, so I'll head that off the pass. When Pamela Anderson called porn users losers, the claim is she was just being disrespectful to her customers, that this is high hypocrisy. I have a different read on that. I think that indicates some shift, and I'd love to reach out to her. And Pamela, if you're watching now, I'd love to talk to you about your experience and why you said what you said and if there's been any backlash. But that's how I read the tea leaves, Matt, that this is someone who has more to lose than to gain by saying something like that about the industry that put her on the map, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, whether she was being hypocritical or not, the fact is she said it, and I think that's illustrative of the sort of backlash pornography and the pornography industry is beginning to experience. I mean, I think it was the year prior, 2015 or 14, she came out and for the first time at a big PETA conference, PETA, she was talking about how she was sexually abused as a child and this sort of thing. And this is why she has such an affection for animals, because they don't want to hurt her, So you do see when women leave the industry, like Bella Knox from Duke University, she too spoke about all that she's going through. It's not a glamorous life at all. We'd like to tell ourselves it is, because that way we get to say, not only am I an adult, I'm contributing to the liberation of women all over the world. I'm a philanthropist, really. It's just
I'm empowering women.
Yeah, it's cute, but it's not true.
And you've interviewed people.
It's not cute either. Yeah, actually.
Right. Yeah, neither cute nor interesting. But one thing that I find interesting, if that's the right word, is in your experiences interviewing people who were inside the pornography industry from I'll say the performer side, both sides of the camera. Do you find that the entire industry is like a cobra eating its own tail from this point of view? That the abuse that so many porn stars, for lack of a better phrase, have suffered, their own abuse somehow conditions them to relive that abuse in a way that feels empowering. And that creates porn addicts who in turn go on to abuse other people. And so everyone's resistance to this multi-headed Medusa monster is reduced. And the problem seems to carry itself forward that way. So abuse begets porn and porn begets abuse. Does that make sense?
It does. It's an interesting point. I'd love to give it some more thought. One thing I certainly know is true is that most women who are in the industry seem to have suffered some serious form of abuse or neglect. And the stories they tell are drearily predictable. They almost always involve this individual trying unsuccessfully to process the hurt, the trauma that they experienced, and then either being preyed upon by the sex industry or becoming so desperate that they felt like this was their only option.
Yeah.
You know, and like this is their only option. I'm not sure we should call that a liberating choice.
Sure.
Nor do I think we're under any obligation to agree with people who tell us that their actions are liberating. You know, just because someone says they find it liberating doesn't mean we have to say, well, okay. We can say, well, you're wrong. You're wrong. I mean, if we meet white supremacist people who run Twitter accounts or websites and tell us they find that empowering, we can say, well, you're wrong too. You know, and I think that's a perfectly legitimate answer.
Why is porn wrong? Just distill it down without any reference to Scripture, Bible, Jesus, Pope.
So whenever we talk about a thing being wrong, we usually mean that it's wrong because of the consequences it brings about, but we can also mean that it's wrong because of what it is. And that's what I want to say. Pornography is wrong because of what it is. So what is it? Well, pornography involves the promotion of the use of the human person. You know, it glorifies, is itself documented evidence of an attitude of sheer use, where there's no willing the good of the other for the sake of the other. It's merely I want you for me regardless of your dignity. And I agree with Karol Wojtyła, Pope John Paul II, who said the human person is a good towards which the only proper and adequate attitude is love. Pornography, viewing, producing, acting, distributing, isn't a proper or adequate attitude we should hold towards a human person, and therefore it's always improper, whether we view it once a week, once a month, once a year. And that doesn't even begin to touch upon the fact that it's also an abuse of the sexual act. That's a whole other component that we could also point to and say for this reason it's wrong as well.
You've got
so it's exploitative.
Yeah.
It's
sure,
exploitative,
sure. Yeah, the person is there to say yes to me.
Yes.
5 million pixelated light images strung together to appear like a naked woman can never say no to me, but my wife can.
Right.
So on.
Yeah.
The first sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, just to say that this argument that, you know, it's exploitative, it's not very sexy, to use a bad term. We do I think often what convicts people is the consequences pornography brings about. Look, let's use another analogy of contraception. We tend to if we're against contraception, we tend to like to talk about the fact that the pill is a carcinogen. But if it weren't, we would still say it's wrong. So we still kind of, okay, bring it back a bit. Why is it wrong? And if we want to say, well, it thwarts one of the primary ends of the sexual act, that's not as sexy, you know.
Yeah, doesn't really resonate.
Right. So we need to use both. We need to talk about the consequences and then why in and of itself it's wrong, I think.
You've got 70 quick findings at the end in your appendix from experts. Crank through a couple of them, Matt, as we could go for hours more. Any come to mind?
I've got the manuscript here. Yeah, so what I did is I wanted to just give people as much research as possible, and one of these appendices I just strung together 70 quick findings in neuroscience, sociology, etc., so that people could use this and then cheat while writing a paper for their school. So let's find one, okay?
The good borrow.
Exactly.
The good borrow, the great steal. Go ahead.
Now, this comes from a study that was done from the Max Planck Institute in Germany. It was called The Brain on Porn. If people want to find it, they can just type that in, and the lead researcher's name was Simone Kuhn, Kuhn. And what they found is when they hooked up people who viewed pornography to these, I believe it was an fMRI scans. So what the researchers found was shrinkage in the brain, especially in the frontal lobes of the brain, which is the sort of managerial center of the brain. Now, in the scientific abstract, they said our hypothesis is that pornography is shrinking their brains, right? That there's a volume loss in the gray and white matter. That said, more research needs to be done. It might just be this is a matter of correlation, not causation. Which, when you think about what they're saying is maybe porn isn't shrinking their brains, but if that's not true, it would just follow that people with smaller brains like porn more. And as I've heard you say once before, that's not a feather in your cap either way.
Yeah. Being wet is associated with swimming. We wouldn't want to go so far as to say causation. Matt, if someone wants to go cold turkey they're listening to you now and they're hearing this conversation and they're done. They've committed to be committed and they stop. How long does it take to defrag or to kind of reset and heal the brain? A day? A week? 90 days? Is there any ballpark figure that experts recommend that you have complete abstinence so that your brain can begin to change the neural pathways and so on?
Yeah, so I imagine we're going to get different responses from different people, and that's probably for a couple of reasons. One is every person is different depending on how much they're viewing pornography, what they're watching. And two, we're only beginning to understand more and more about the brain recently. But in their book, The Porn Trap, Larry and Wendy Maltz speculate, I'm going off memory here, so I might be wrong, but I believe they said it takes around 20 months for the dopamine system to restore itself. So that's just under 2 years. Now, this isn't I'm terrible, 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 fine. It's more like one grows in recovery as the brain rewires itself. So we used to think that the brain was, after adolescence, it was like concrete. It couldn't be changed anymore. Mm-hmm. But we now know that's not true. There's this thing neuroscientists talk about, neuroplasticity. Mm-hmm. And that is the idea that the brain is constantly changing itself, kind of like the muscles. You use it or you lose it. And so right now, if someone decides to quit cold turkey, they're probably going to have relapses, okay? But it's important not to view this fight as an all or nothing one.
Sure.
Rather, we should recognize that freedom is one day at a time. And so every day I get to choose by my actions the sort of person I want to be. And I'd say, congratulations, that's awesome. Don't be discouraged by your setbacks, but instead, gather around yourself a supportive community, even if it's just a few people, and keep fighting, because it'll always be worth it. At the end of our life, we're not going to lay on our deathbed and say, I wish I had viewed more porn. Mm-hmm. If anything, we'll look back and, how much respect would someone have if you said, well, this person was addicted to pornography. They did everything within their power to stop. They found it a tremendous struggle, but they fought valiantly. Gosh, I've got tremendous respect for this certain individual, as opposed to the person who did nothing and just gave in to their weakness. So we should try and be the ones who strive.
Yeah, it's like a soldier who keeps getting shot, goes to the hospital, back on the battlefield. There's nothing wrong with getting shot. Yeah. You can fall in battle, and I guess victory doesn't necessarily have to do solely with the final result, but with what you do with each individual failure. Matt, what do you say to spouses of people who just can't stop? They're mired, they blame themselves, and hence they enable it, either by permitting the behavior because they know they can't control it, or by shaming, and they themselves begin to feel out of control with things like resent and anger.
So my wife and I put out a book last year with the Catholic Answers Press. It's called Restored, True Stories of Love and Trust After Porn. And that involved, among other things, 10 stories of wives who talked about the betrayal trauma they experienced due to their partner's pornography addiction. I'd recommend people get that. Mm-hmm. But this word betrayal trauma is a new term that counselors and psychologists are beginning to use to describe those who discover that the one who promised to be true to them really hasn't been. And there was a study done that found that many women whose husbands were addicted to porn were exhibiting signs identical to those with post-traumatic stress disorder. Mm-hmm. So very often the wife will want to say, what can I do about my husband? And that's a legitimate, fair question to ask. But before that question, one should first ask, what can I do about me? It's sort of like the whole oxygen mask in the airplane thing.
Right.
If we're traumatized, we're not going to be in a place either to help or to process our own stuff. We're going to have to go seek help. One great website for that, it's Bloom, as in a flower, bloomforwomen.com. That's a great place that people can learn more. And then our site, integrityrestored.com.
What can you find at integrityrestored.com for people of all stripes who are looking for immediate support from a listening ear and an understanding heart?
So Integrity Restored is our apostolate within the Catholic Church. We run men's intensives, priestly intensives, where people can come for like 3.5 days, and there'll be counselors there to help them. We run symposiums in dioceses around the country. We print and give out prayer cards to priests. They just have to ask for them. They don't even have to pay us. They can give us a donation if they want. One thing just real quick that might be helpful is if you go to integrityrestored.com and you go to getting help, there's an article on finding a therapist. And in that, there's different text links that will take you to websites where you can punch in your postal code and find a sex addiction or pornography addiction therapist in your area. But I should also point out, we have a podcast called Integrity Restored. So weekly, people can hear interviews I do with people who've been affected by pornography in all sorts of ways.
The book is called The Porn Myth, published by Ignatius Press. You can get a copy at patrickcoffin.net. We'll find out more there, because I'm going to post the books and the resources and websites and so on that Matt and I have been chatting about. Matthew, you have written a magnificent book. I mean it. This is the one-stop shop book from so many different angles. There's so many, I would say, a growing list of books for Christians by and for believers. This book covers entirely different ground. I think it's a fantastic resource. Thanks for being a gift. You're the man on this, and it's always an honor to talk to you about it and other things.
It's nice here. Thank you very much for having me on.
MattFradd.com is the website, or integrityrestored.com. I'm Patrick Coffin. You can find out more about this episode and the show notes and some background at patrickcoffin.media. This is the first of a series of podcasts that I'm devoting to the scourge of pornography. Upcoming episodes will be uploaded post-haste. Be a saint. What else is there?